Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. DUANE the Great Writer and Seer.
Prior to the real side experience I will shortly be recounting, I would find myself in an awareness position, which is a relatively constant situation for myself. That of bridging the physical and the real side, which I refer to as the between state. For this is an automatic, though generally brief, transitionary phase from the physical level position, as afforded via the physical body mechanics, to where the awareness vacates the physical vehicle and is at liberty to explore multi-dimensionally the real side. As though we had removed a virtual reality headset array which had resigned us to the simulation it is designed to afford. From my astral projection indulgence days, so I would become adept at the perpetuation of this transitionary stage, retaining myself within it for lengthy durations, that facilitated better my ability to go out of body. To maintain such a between state requires the ceasing of all thought and emotional idea generating, and although I no longer consciously astral project, as this was rather a constant practice in years past, the methodology I employed, this in-between state I would utilize, is somewhat ingrained and will as though automatically occur on a fairly frequent basis. The physical body designed to provide the physical level as our experience, as I mentioned, the multi-dimensions of creation all present, but we are removed from our ability to perceive these as we remain operating through the physical vehicle. But as we straddle the two positions, it is as though the virtual reality headset, as our analogy, is partially removed, the overall scene retained as that of the physical, but features and elements of multi-dimensional creation will manifest within the physical level environment, features that would be within their own respective dimensional positions. These other dimensional features will only be visible to the one operating in this between state, as naturally any bystander, if they happened to be present, would be fully encased in their physical level affording physical body forms, and where they are resigned to the densest life level accordingly, where nothing of the real side will be apparent. And over the years, I have shared my various experiences from this between state position, much by way of a manifested anomaly, numerous attacks that stem from the real side, and encounters with all manner of body types, with their various objectives, agendas, and where some are simply curious and initiating a contact. From the perspective of these body type bleedovers, they will be operating in their respective dimensional real side environments. I will be in their presence, and nothing of the physical level will be apparent to them. For indeed, with such a between state position, the real side bleedovers, features, and body types do not always fit snugly within the confines of my physical level bedroom, as effectively the physical level scene is an overlapping filter, and there have been many instances where the manifesting body types have been partially embedded in the walls, etc. I've come to the determination that what features as these bleedovers is what I am to be made aware of at that moment, be it an attack of some kind, or a beneficial encounter, as though what is required to be experienced is isolated as a feature from the real side, and made apparent on the physical, as I operate in this between state position. That just as the guides ensure we receive that which is necessary for our awareness process, or our next assignment on the real side, they make use of my relatively frequent between state positioning in the same way, capitalizing on the way we each have uniquely designed the consciousness and personal self. In this instance, as I found myself in this between state position, a body type would be initiating a contact, a real side bleed over manifesting in my physical level room. The body form was more comprising of a fluctuating shadow than as a constant form, though the general semblance of being humanoid in shape and design. Impressions would reveal that the intentions of this particular shadow being were malign, although I maintained my between state position, which can be easily broken if we return to being fully as operating through the physical body, fully awake, that I might determine this shadow creature's objective. It would not communicate with me in any shape or fashion, but definitely desired my attention, as it rather tugged and pulled on me, and in such situations, if nothing is to develop from the between state position, oftentimes prudent is it to transition fully onto the real side, and within the environment where this physical level bleed over is operating from, that more can be learned as to the reason and nature of such contact situations. And as I decided this, so my physical level bedroom became vastly expanded on my right side, and within this extended area of a bedroom now were present a number of the same type of body form as the one vying for my attention, a gathering group of shadow beings with similarly ill-intended inclinations as were my impressions. And now I would transition from the between state to the real side fully, determining to follow these shadow creatures to their dimensional positioned source, but instead found myself operating as a part of a military group. All were human as far as outer appearances suggested, and we were stationed within a large woodland. Impressions revealed our location to be the earth, but our exact position was never determined. Oftentimes, if experiences are of a military variety, this indicates the representation as that of the awareness process, as the focus necessary for such an undertaking can be expressed quite suitably as the discipline required where military service is concerned, although impressions suggested that although this wasn't the case here, this particular military group comprising of the certain humans that it did were of significance, that were to shortly be embroiled in a situation that would have far-reaching human species and Earth-related consequences. It was as though I had been assigned to this military group. I would be operating as my usual physical level human form, and although accepted into their unit, was rather ostracized by them, as though tolerated among them, but not especially welcomed. As such, I would rather keep myself to myself, as the military individuals went about their various training and activities, as though the sense of the necessity for me to remain among them, despite how I was seemingly received. As I said, the impressions of the military group having a significant part to play in events shortly to unfold, and where I was tasked to either assist in some capacity or intervene. There would be a moment where the military group were out on training exercises, making use of the large forestry area around a series of wooden shacks which served as their base of operations. Although I could have joined them, this wasn't demanded of me, and indeed I wouldn't have been especially welcomed either, what with the curious disdain the military group harboured for me. It was as though, on a subconscious level of them, they knew that my presence was indicative of a situation that was to befall them, a situation they rather would not experience, and it was rather a case of misaligned disdain then, or transference, for that which they couldn't pinpoint or determine. For as the deciders of that which we experience, the idea causality is present as a consciously implanted agreements we either have created ourselves or agreed to as created by others. In regards to agreements we are not conscious of, if they are perhaps subliminally implanted or stem from previous lifetimes and are set to effect manifest in our current physical level positions, regardless of being on an awareness process or not, where we are afforded greater access to the entirety of the consciousness construct and the ideas it comprises of. Oftentimes, individuals can receive a sense of foreboding of imminent situations soon to befall them, for we each are awareness that is animating through the consciousness, the vaster bulk of it, the subconscious included, even if we choose to be one-dimensionally focused and disregarding of the entirety of our consciousness creation. These military characters were getting a sense of impending effects of an untoward nature, and additionally the sense of my presence heralding this soon-to-be effected happenstance, hence the hostility misdirected at myself. As I mentioned, they were training in the woods. I was in proximity to their position, and as though waiting for this effect to transpire. And then there would be a sudden influx of additional individuals surging through the woods. They would have the outer appearance of humans also. Interestingly, all would be female, and their objective was in regards to every member of the military group. The female humans would descend upon the military unit with eerie speed and efficiency of motion, and as they made a physical contact, they somewhat absorbed each target into themselves, assimilating them, that nothing of the soldier remained, and that which they had been, their consciousness, became now a part of the female that had absorbed them. As such, the females took on all traits, skills, and abilities each soldier previously possessed. The consciousness which affects the body forms will be of a particular idea construct, almost akin to a computer of data information. In essence, it was as though all that the consciousness contained was transferred to the female's consciousness, a meshing of consciousnesses then. The awareness that had been animating through the soldier's consciousness now was sharing the consciousness mesh with the female, but with no impression of the presence of the individual that had been the soldier. This seemed to be a shared dual collective consciousness, but one where the soldier was as though locked out of it, as though resigned to a backseat position in a vehicle with no ability to decide the destination, the equivalent of a computer shared by two individuals, though where only one of them dictates what is experienced and visited on the screen. Impressions revealed that these females were in actuality the shadow beings that had manifested in my bedroom initially during my between-state experience, and perhaps then this rather verified they were not as human as they outwardly appeared to be, more that they had the ability to alter their external forms, and that they chose human females suggested a mechanism of allure. For through the agreements as present within these particular human soldiers was facilitated the opportunity of an invasion, so to speak. That, however, and by what circumstances these agreements were secured in relation to these shadow beings, and their ability to absorb the soldiers and commandeer their consciousnesses into their own, this was the opening by which the shadow creatures could utilize, access the earth therefore, with the intentions of absorbing the entirety of humanity into themselves, as though each shadow being was unlimited in how many consciousnesses it could assimilate, and very likely through seduction would they operate, able to change form at will, and so whatever outer guise was required where the seduction of humanity was concerned. To what extent they would be successful, who could say? Everything based on agreement as it is, the extent of their humanity absorption dependent then on humanity's overall agreement, but they had made a start, the soldiers had afforded them their opportunity through the agreements they harboured. I'm uncertain why the shadow beings were initiating contact with me in the between-state position. Perhaps they, like the soldiers, recognized on a subconscious level, if only the sense of it, that I would be involved in their affairs, and through a curiosity they were then engaging with me. Although it did seem that I potentially could be assimilated as the soldiers were, as though present in my consciousness were the same agreements, unrealized and unreleased, allowing this to occur. For with most of the soldiers now absorbed into the females, they also would turn their attentions on me, but before they could seize me, so I would take to the air as though on invisible wings. They were unable to subject me to the same absorption effect consequently, and I would return to the military camp where a few frightened soldiers had secured themselves. I would say to those that had up until now evaded the females, "Come with me if you want to live," a line in fact from the second Terminator movie. Unfortunately, the extent of our ability to assist others is again agreement dependent, and despite my words, the females would now lay siege to the wooden shacks, and every soldier would fall to them. I myself would continue to evade the shadow beings for a time, but then lost my ability to fly, as though, as I mentioned, my agreements in relation to them always would dictate the same fate as the soldiers, all as a prearranged and decided scripts, if you will, as all body forms play simulated games with each other according to agreement parameters as determined between them. There were a series of experiences I shared years ago where I would have encounters with the species I referred to as the mutants. They operated as a hive mind consciousness and would increase their number by converting all other body forms to their kind and become as part of their collective. That although these were a different breed of consciousness-affected beings, they operated in a similar manner, though rather than their numbers increasing, they became as consciousness collectives operating through a single vessel or body vehicle, with the primary shadow being in control of all consciousness it had assimilated. The awarenesses that had been animating through the absorbed consciousnesses resigned as a backseat passengers, as I mentioned. Impressions suggested that my dealings with the mutants, even though that situation had been resolved, the mutant collective dismantled, had in some way resulted in ideas being taken on that had me as a recipient of effects, whereby I could be assimilated by these shadow beings with the soldiers, and whoever else of humanity they were to absorb. For now, in the experience, with my flying ability no longer available, I would be swarmed by the females, and in the process of being assimilated also. Although we are never resigned to our effects, in the nowness of our real awareness is this reality, everything is a present, that although effects have played out in a simulated creation or other dimensionally on the real side, the causal ideas can be altered or removed, as though we had returned to a point prior to the unfolding of the experiential situation and ensured that the effects now will play out differently. For I would be at a simulated creational moment prior to my entering the scene with the soldiers, where like them I ultimately would be assimilated by the shadow beings. I would be in a kind of cafeteria in the company of a group of individuals and discussing the situation in regards to the shadow beings and their desire to attempt the absorption of humanity. Very likely I was in the midst of the guides, and it was decided to remove the ideas that were to play out as effects on the physical earth potentially, as oftentimes we operate in a karmic clean-up capacities, where we are the delivery mechanism for effects that individuals would have experienced for their choices and actions, in such a way that rather than allow the effects to play out, irrespective of agreement allowing such to be, and where ultimately abrasively operating body forms meet the reflected effects of themselves, as an alternative, we can either displace such characters or simply remove the ideas of them and that which they are creating prior to its manifestation, as what impressions revealed would be a physical level human scenario. This isn't a violation of the free will right of beings to experience what they will in relation to others and where they have the agreements to do so, but a managing of the effects they would have experienced in reflective accordance. This dismantling of ideas prior to their physical level manifestation generally take the visual form of destructing the scenes and situations in whatever simulated way they might. In this case, I elected to return to the scene, the undisclosed woodland location of the earth, but in the form of a large red dragon. That although I couldn't assist the soldiers, their agreements of a particular, disallowing my intervention into their affairs regarding the shadow beings, with the soldier assimilation complete, and where the shadow creatures in their female forms now intending to surge throughout the earth and humanity, I would as though quarantine the woodland area, exuding an almighty fire from my dragonic mouth that would destroy the females before they were able to vacate the woodland. As graphic as this may seem, as I mentioned, it represented my delivering a viable alternative to the karmic effects the shadow beings would have eventually experienced anyway, with the added bonus of preventing them from attempting their humanity absorption. The ideas that were this potential physical level event scenario no longer were present, that there was now not even the remotest possibility of they being exacted as humanity's overall experience, and there the experience would end.